Even if Petra and Nagi requested help from the Adventurers Guild, this village would already be in ruins by the time they arrived. Even in such a situation, these adventurists only wave away and talk nonsense. Ben Deshtar continued his discussion with the crowd. We're the victims, too. The raid leader is missing and we're left with nothing. The breakout is no longer our concern. Do what you want, he voiced. Shouting at his opponent, he suggested that if he had a grievance, he should file a formal complaint with the guild. They weren't responsible for that, and they didn't have to listen to nasty things from people. Adventurers are not heroes or defenders. Nagi was well aware of that as he watched the squabble. These upstarts who only care about their own gain. Even so, it is the power of adventurers that is needed in this situation. Only they can prevent the dungeon from breaking through. At times like this, Nagi regretted that his class was Courier. Now they have to evacuate the residents. Saving their lives was the priority. Petra understood that perfectly well. The carrier wasn't so sure. He doubted the men could be saved. He clutched his messenger medallion tightly in his hand. The inspector had not expected such indecision from the boy. What did he mean by that? Nagi smiled broadly as he thought of a plan. He knew that winter was coming soon. If people lose their homes, will they be able to survive such a long winter? He clutched his medallion more and more tightly in his hand. No, that's impossible. He ripped the hated piece of jewelry from his neck and tossed it as far away as he could. What this village needs now is not a courier. A golden circle glittered in Nagi's hands, so the carrier burst out laughing. What a stroke of luck. Went into the village for a while, and there's a dungeon break. He tried to speak louder so the adventurers could hear him better. He managed to get their attention. Nagi embarrassed the inspector with his question. After all, if the dungeon rupture was eliminated, the reward from it could be taken away without any commissions, right? Which the girl hesitantly confirmed. It's just a gift of fate for the courier. Bandishtar and Naranero stared directly at him. He was of genuine interest to them. Who is he? Is this guy really going to sweep the dungeon? When they noticed the color of his badge, their eyes rounded. Was there really a gold-ranked adventurer standing before them? Around Naga's neck glittered a golden, round medallion with the image of a sword inside. The guy invited them to join him and promised to split the reward 9-1. With a sly smile, he waited for them to answer in the affirmative. The idea was quite real. Therefore, Nagi temporarily became an adventurer. Smiling nervously, the courier asked a question addressing Petra. By the way, Inspector, what is the fine for illegally assuming the title of adventurer? As far as I know, it starts at 1,000 gold pieces, the girl replied. Nagi tensed up. Damn. This portal leading to an uncharted dimension is a dungeon recommended only for adventurers with a rank of at least gold. Normal dungeons, no matter how high in complexity they may be, will eventually, it comes down to destroying monsters. But in the abyss, the enemy is space itself. Even an experienced adventurer cannot foresee the conditions for completing this dungeon before entering it, which increases the risk of disappearance or death many times over. That's why this dungeon is avoided. Moreover, Petra, Nagi, and the adventurers had to pass this dungeon in a certain amount of time. The newfound team stood at the rift, looking at the whirlwind of flames. Judging by the magic limit, this dungeon would begin to collapse in an hour. In other words, if they wanted to prevent the destruction, they should go through it in an hour. But in 1 hour, it will be very difficult to handle any challenge, especially if you're in the abyss. Nagi's only hope was that they would come across an easy dungeon. They didn't have a second to lose. Without wasting any more time talking, the team headed into the split. Something's happened. The energies are colliding. There was an explosion. A bright flash of light illuminated the whole place. They tried to see something through the bright light. Suddenly, everything stopped. They saw high mountains and rocks floating in the air. It was night outside, and here it was day. It was amazing. The adventurers did not hide their delight. The guy and the girl happily began to explain themselves. This is how the historic first dungeon sweep of the Dungeon of Rising Star, Banadeshtar, began, the guy was saying with a smile on his face. Gotta show those guild assholes what's what, the girl answered him. The guy assumed that when the guild saw what they were capable of, their jaws would drop. Having unwittingly become listeners of the adventurers' conversation, Nagi and Petra began to better understand the expression, ignorance is bliss, because as soon as Petra saw all this, she thought they were finished. Nagi couldn't disagree with her. The guy decided to stay out of the way of the dreamers and ignore their silly chatter. The flying stones led upwards, straight to a castle located on a stone island high above them. The whole structure is like saying, "Welcome to hell." Looking up, Petra and Nagi thought through their actions. They needed to get to the end in an hour. That's why the courier had lied about being one of the adventurers. On the other hand, his intentions were not evil, so the inspector was not going to dwell on it. But she was very angry with him. They had no other choice. After all, if the guy had asked the adventurers, posing as a courier, they would have been unlikely to help them. But it's hard to say no to a gold rank. It's the kind of thing you can fight with as a team. It might be far-fetched, but if the dungeon wasn't cleared, there would be a breakthrough. Petra knew that. That's why she came here. A dungeon breach must be prevented. If not, the villagers would be in danger. The blonde started licking her fingers. Then the girl with the cat ears moved on to licking her shoulder. She couldn't understand what was bothering them so much. It was the reason Nara Nero couldn't stand slow people. The blonde assumed the pose of a cat before jumping. She knelt down and put out her claws. She could have made it through the lightness on her own. She pushed herself off the ground and jumped from rock to rock, aiming upward. Her partner didn't like it. Her actions seemed dangerous to him. The girl felt a powerful energy begin to constrict her wrist. In a split second, that force began to pull her down. Naranero didn't realize what was going on. Flying down past a pile of rocks, she fell right in front of Bandishtar. The boy resented it. Just like in the training camp, the girl acted first and thought later. He started to tell her off. Realizing her foolish act, she asked him to stop swearing. How do you not scold her? There could be debuffs or curses in the portals to the abyss. They'd been through this so many times at camp. She was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Nero knew that. She had just forgotten a little. The adventurers are right. The inspector raised her index finger upward, forming a small blue cloud. In the portal to the abyss, the first thing to check for is the presence of the curse. To do this, Petra used her special scout skill, detection. Energy formed on the adventurer's wrists. Like shackles, she shackled them with chains. It seemed to be the curse of the dungeon. The team stood bound in invisible shackle. Now they must move together without being separated from each other. Much to Naranero's dismay, it looked like tricks wouldn't work in this dungeon. Luckily, the newfound team had plenty of climbing gear, which was found in Nagi's sack. The blonde, cat-eared girl was surprised by his huge sack, holding a climbing hook, the rope of which went deep into the bag. Nagi prepared to try to move forward one step at a time. One step at a time. This is the key to such spatial dungeons. There's no need to rush to avoid wasting your strength. But you shouldn't slow down too much either, keeping an optimal pace. Then it would be possible to reach the goal. Nagi moved at the head of the team, ordering the others to follow his pace. We shouldn't forget that they were chained together, so the distance couldn't be too great. It was necessary to keep an optimal distance and move forward. The blonde with the cat ears didn't like this arrangement. She thought their leader was walking too slowly. She wanted to lead the group and run ahead. Nagi forbade her to do so. It's better to go slowly but with a well-thought-out route than to go fast and lose time on the way back. I mean, even if you follow the exact route. The problem was that there are always a lot of variables to be found in the abyss, like a huge winged stone pig hovering in the air. Opening her mouth, she sucked in the rocks that flew past her. Once in its mouth, they began to break into small pieces. The pig ate them with a crunch. This situation seems to be a dead end. Nagi watched the huge unknown monster. Petra decided to look up the answer in his notebook. This monster is called a stone-eating pig. Although it is a strong monster, it is not aggressive unless provoked. The guidebook said that they dwell in places with a lot of rocks, but the fact that they were even found here was surprising. According to the source, it also emits waste quickly. A stone ball flew out from under the pig's tail with an appropriate sound. It eats and excretes waste, thus changing the structure of the dungeon. This dungeon ecosystem is incredible. Nagi was amused by the inspector's satisfied look. It was just her first time seeing it in person. But anyway, they have a problem. The platform they wanted to climb on was completely destroyed. They had only one way left. Throw the hook that was in Naga's hands on the stone pig and attach the rope. But if they miss, they'll provoke her. The stone pig could become aggressive. The team didn't have the time or energy to fight. In that case, Bandishtar is up for the challenge. It looked like his finest hour had arrived. Kneading his right hand, he asked the leader to watch carefully. The adventurer thrust it forward. The hand began to heat up. When the heat reached its maximum, an explosion followed. Two of the guy's fingers separated from his hand and flew forward. Falling down, the fingers began to transform into something. It was a necromancer's special skill, finger summoning. It caused pieces of the necromancer's flesh to transform into two sturdy warriors. They were segmented golems, Pebble and Cobble. Surprising, the summoning ability was very rare. The team looked at their newfound help and delight, all except the girl with the cat ears. If the summoned creature caught the hook, they could attach the rope without provoking the stone pig. Looking at the golems, Nagi noticed something odd about their behavior. Moving soldiers trembled. The neck of one of them snapped to the side with a loud crunch. They were moving strangely. They were twisting their limbs, bending in different directions. Nero told the team that in the camp, Bandishtar was nicknamed Explosive Ban. No one trusted his summoned creatures, because his control over them was mediocre to say the least, and at the end all of his minions exploded. While in hypnosis, the guy continued to control the golems. He asked them to be quiet. After all, controlling the summoned creatures is like looking in a mirror and moving the left hand separately from the right. If he maintained control for no more than 5 minutes, he'd be fine. He hoped so. Nagi and Petra continued to watch the soldiers dance on the back of the stone pig. Though it looked uncertain, but time was short, so Nagi prepared a hook. They need to get through quickly before the whole thing explodes. He swung and sent the gun flying. Hook rushed forward, holding the hand of his comrade, who in turn held onto the stone pig. One of the soldiers reached out to catch him. Past his hand, the hook went straight into the golem's head. It smeared it and lodged itself firmly inside. At the same moment, the necromancer grabbed his head with a scream. During the summoning part of the consciousness is connected to the creatures, you have to be careful. Nagi apologized and asked to be patient for a moment. The courier began to climb up the rope. Although it's a very difficult dungeon, they were still a bit lucky. The abilities of the adventurers accompanying them proved useful in this dungeon. Boys were already at their destination, especially those minions. It will be pretty easy to get through the dungeon with them. At the finish line, the leader sensed something had gone wrong. It had only been 3 minutes, but the hook was slowly starting to leave the soldier's head. The crew members felt themselves getting seasick. They asked Nagi to hurry up. Bandishtar realized what was about to happen. He apologized to the team. The golem should be exploding any minute now. The crack that appeared on the golem's head as a result of the hook hitting it was out of control. The soldiers began to swell. Through the stitches in their bodies, a pink light began to appear. The golems were getting bigger and bigger. At one point they looked like a balloon. Eventually, a bright light burst out. There was a large explosion, a cloud of smoke and chunks of rock flying around. The hook was no longer holding on to anything and was floating in the air. Snapping off the rope, the guys promptly began to fall downward, trying to grab onto the air currents. They were scared and screaming at the top of their voices. Everyone was trying to grab what they could. We had to start all over again. Nagi couldn't let that happen. If they fell back to the starting point, they would never make it to the top. Right now, we should at least minimize our losses. He reached into his bag. Rapidly, the bag began to take on air and inflate. A special new messenger and air cushion. The bag ended up on one of the boulders, similar to the ones the boys were flying past. They took turns landing on it, ending up on top of each other. When the last member of the team landed, the bag pushed them out, and the guys were in the air again. The courier's foot stepped on the ground. When they reached the top of one of the rocky islets, they began to catch the sack. Nagi was the first to grab the end of the rope that dangled from the sack. He pulled the sack up. Is everyone all right? He turned to the team. Thanking him, Petra almost let slip, almost calling him a courier. She managed to stop herself just in time. Naranero cheered the necromancer as he lay on the ground, saying how good he was. Time was running short. The inspector lamented that they had lost much of their progress. Would they make it to the top in time? Petra looked up at the castle in the distance. They have no choice. The courier turned to the adventurers. His eyes were filled with anger. In a blink of an eye, he started yelling at the couple. Now he could no longer adjust to their stamina. The boys hadn't expected this. Everyone would have to pull themselves together to make it in the time left. He put a glove on his hand in the shape of a frog's paw. It's a special courier item, an adhesive climbing kit. He handed out the kit to his team. The boys donned gloves and special shoes. All except Nara, she refused. Now they would have to walk vertically all the way to the top. The necromancer wasn't ready for that. They can't let their guard down. If one falls off, they all fall. The closer to the top, the more traps and variables will arise. As they traveled, they passed an area with falling rocks, trying to keep their balance on a patch of ice. We also tried to keep our composure on the narrow log section, on which a stone monkey threw surprises in the form of banana peels. In the explosive rock section, they came across a flying boulder. You can't touch it. It was an explosive rock. Such a thorny path took a lot of their energy, and they were exhausted and begging for rescue. They did not know how long they had left to climb. Nagi cheered them on, telling them that they were almost there, that they had to be patient a little longer. It was the 10th time he had said it. That made the exhausted adventurers very angry. Naranero would rather fight monsters than climb mountains. That's not why she became an adventurer. The courier stood his ground. Convincing the girl that this time he meant it, he stood looking at the castle, which was on a huge stone island. The top of the castle was already visible. The castle walls were well protected. It seems that the boss monster of the location is waiting for them at the top. The pink monster slept soundly in the cold embrace of the castle's stone walls. The adventurers were overjoyed. They had met a monster, At last, Bane Deshtar's first official fight would take place. The girl is ready to deal with the boss monster and show those guild assholes who only gave her a copper rank what's what. That made her feel stronger. Bane Deshtar couldn't help but agree with her. How could the guild do this to them? They were the elite of the training camp. We need to put them in their place. But, looking at them, Nagi realized that judging from their physiological abilities and talents, these two were indeed above the copper rank. It's probably because necromancers are despised and beastmen have only recently stopped being slaves. The blonde was determined. Worst case scenario, the leader of the group would be able to handle it. The necromancer agreed with her. It was logical. He was a gold-ranked adventurer after all. Nagi felt awkward. He had taken them just to deal with the monster. Something was bothering Petra and she asked them to wait a bit. Looking at the pink monster, she realized that something was wrong here. The monster boss at the top was a lindworm, but their species does not have a purple color. If a lindworm turned purple, there is only one way to do it. In the event of his death, the monster's eye sockets had a white coloration. He was already dead. Nagi didn't expect this. There was a sword sticking out of the lindworm's body. The blond man's rest was disturbed by some sounds. He had been resting gloriously before. With his hands behind his head, he rested his back against his prey. A sword protruded from the dragon's body. Hearing voices coming from downstairs, he decided to check it out. It can't be. Glancing at the castle, Nagi saw the dark figure of a man near the cliff. Could he be dangerous? The leader didn't know that. One had to be prepared for anything. Standing at the cliff, the man on top of the castle didn't think for long and decided to act. He pushed off harder and took off, heading in the direction of the adventurers. Confused, not knowing what to expect, they stood on a piece of land floating in the air and awaited their fate. A strong stream of air enveloped Nagi. Lightning fast, the huge man was on the team's island. From such a powerful landing, rocks flew from under his feet, flying apart. A round medallion adorned his chest. The man looked directly into the leader's eyes. The commander only cared about one thing at that moment. Naga's gaze was fixed on the jewelry on the warrior's chest. Mithril rank, so it's not a raid cancel. The man complained about the resulting problem in the form of the adventurous team. The warrior stood in the crater that had formed, surrounded by adventurers. He believed that no one could enter this dungeon. After all, there was going to be a breakthrough here. The man looked down at the confused opponents. Nagi was outraged by this. Sometimes you meet people like this. It would be more accurate to say non-humans who purposely set up a dungeon breach. Why did it have to be so complicated? The big guy had a brilliant idea. The four of them will be presumed dead during the dungeon sweep. That's a great idea. Alright, it's done.